Hello, and welcome to the third episode of Appalachian Arcana. Thanks for coming out, and thanks especially to our friends here at Elderbrew for having us and for supporting this crazy idea of ours. I'm Cam Collins, and this is my co-host and hubby, Ben Collins.
Hi, everybody. If you haven't heard about us before, we are a podcast about the strange and unusual in Appalachia. And we cover a lot of stuff because we want to have a lot of different range, so it's everything from UFOs to ghosts to true crime, that's especially weird. So are you going to run first tonight? Is that the idea?
I'm going first.
All right, what's the story that you're going to cover?
I'm here tonight to tell you about the Zoo Man, Thomas D. Huskey, Knoxville's first serial killer. Does anybody know about Mr. Huskey?
I haven't heard of him.
All right, well, you're going to find out. So our story sort of begins on October 20th, 1992. A local hunter is wandering around the woods off Cahaba Lane, which is a dead-end road near I-40. It runs parallel to the interstate, and it's east of Knoxville. I've seen photos of the area. There's a big billboard. Like, if you've been, driving back to Bristol from Knoxville, you've seen it.
Yeah.
So, yeah, apparently he's wandering around, allegedly, rumor has it, he needs a bathroom break. And he stumbles across a body. So, of course, he calls 911. Sheriff's deputies come out. They search the scene and discover the body of a nude woman partially covered with an old mattress. And she turns out to be Patricia Rose Anderson, who had been reported missing a week before, I think by her mom. From what little I could gather, this was actually kind of difficult to research because it's mostly, pretty pre-internet. Like, there was a little going on back then, but it was not ubiquitous at the time.
Yeah.
And not all of the records have really been put online at this point.
Okay.
So the woman Patricia had been tied up and strangled, and the autopsy later showed that she was pregnant. So
that's a double murder charge.
Yeah, as you can guess, the police are pretty, hot to get this guy. And as they search the area over the course of the week looking for clues, they discover the remains of another woman. And then another one. And finally, a fourth.
Wait, all in the same area? This is like a dumping ground type?
It is a dumping ground.
Okay.
And it's this really kind of trashy area that, there's a dead-end road and there's like old mattresses and other dumped crap in the area.
Okay.
So, yeah, and...
Sounds horrifying. Actually.
It is horrifying. And the women were identified as Patricia Ann Johnson, Darlene Smith, and Susan Eaststone, all of whom, like Patricia, the first Patricia Anderson, were either known or suspected to be sex workers.
Okay.
So...
Not the first serial killer to...
to prey on that community. So, yeah, at this point, the sheriff's department is like, oh, crap, we might have a serial killer. Over at the city police department, Knoxville PD, they hear about the case, and investigator Tom Presley recognizes the area immediately and notifies the sheriff's department that he thinks he knows who did it.
Really?
Yep. Back in February of the same year, Presley had interviewed a woman who came to the police to report a rape. She said that she had been abducted in the city and driven to a remote area where she was raped and robbed.
Okay, this is like escalating into...
Yes.
She was lucky in a sense.
Yeah. And eventually, at first she was a little evasive, but she did eventually admit to Presley that she was a sex worker, like the murdered women. Mm-hmm. And Presley didn't just, ignore her. He listened to her, and she led him to a secluded area of the woods off Cahaba Lane. in the area, this is where we learned that it was littered with discarded mattresses and things, and she told him that it was often used by sex workers and their clients because it was private. To Presley's surprise, and I assume hers, when they pulled up to the spot, a car was already there. And the witness identified it as her attacker's vehicle.
Wait, so he's lurking there?
He's lurking there. He's not just lurking, though.
Okay.
So they get out of the, Presley and the woman get out of the car, which surprises me that he lets her get out, right? And walk around with him with this guy around. So they get out of the car, they walk into the woods, and they catch him in the act.
Oh my God.
Yep. He has another woman naked on her knees and tied up in the woods and is beating her up. Like, they catch him in the act right there.
Oh, what?
Uh-huh.
So this is victim number 6.
Well, no, but this was February. This is before.
Oh, I get it. Oh, because they're investigating the rape.
Yeah.
So, but total victims are 6, but this is the second time.
Well, it's more than 6.
Okay.
So they obviously he's arrested on the spot, and taken into custody. His name is Thomas Huskey. And investigator Presley learns that he's well known to the local sex workers, who've nicknamed him the Zoo Man because he liked to brag about his job at the Knoxville Zoo, where apparently he and his dad worked with the elephants.
Okay.
Yeah.
Worked with.
Well, and I came across, a rumor on a site about, it was like, an animal rescue kind of site. They were talking about, they think he was actually fired for abusing the elephants.
Oh my God.
Not in that way, but abusing the elephants.
Still.
So yeah,
Still.
And he had a bad reputation among the sex workers for getting violent and abusive. And so a lot of them had actually...
watch out for this guy.
Yeah, they'd started to avoid him. He had a bad reputation. And Presley discovered that 2 other women had already reported him for the same thing. He took them either to Cahaba Lane or another secluded location, tied them up, raped them, and robbed them, usually taking cash and jewelry. So, the investigator tries to put a case together, but the women were too afraid to testify at the time. Now, once the sheriff's department hears this, their theory was that this arrest had triggered an escalation in his behavior. Basically, he was like, well, next time I'm not leaving any witnesses.
Right.
Because the bodies that were discovered, there was one that was more fresh, but most of them had, were decomposing and had been there a while. Once they hear about this, they get a warrant and go search his parents' home where he was living at the time in Pigeon Forge, where they found porn, rope, and women's jewelry that they believed belonged to the victims. So, he's taken into custody. They take him to Knox County lockup, and he's there for about a month when he sends word through the jail that he's willing to talk. TBI agent David Davenport, who was assisting Knox County with the investigation, for anyone who's not local, TBI is the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation. So David Davenport is assisting Knox County with the investigation. He drives over to the county jail to conduct an interview. And he said that at first, Huskey appeared the same as in every other interview, just normal. At one point, Davenport steps out of the room for a minute, and when he returns, Huskey's demeanor had changed. He was aggressive, very demanding, kind of being a bully, and oddly, he was using his right hand. And Huskey, up till that point, they noticed that he was left-handed. So Davenport sits back down with this guy, and he says, "Give me a cigarette, and I'll tell you everything you want to know. I'm Kyle, and I hate Tommy."
Oh, shit.
Oh, yes. So Kyle proceeded to give the investigator details of raping, torturing, and killing the women, whom he referred to as experiments.
Okay.
Very nice. And he said that he did it to hurt Tommy.
Oh, wow.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
And one interesting little side note, at this time they hadn't realized it, but the day after he was arrested, because they had him in hand, Huskey was taken to court to answer an outstanding warrant for solicitation that he'd been avoiding. So he pled guilty and signed the waiver as Kyle Huskey, which no one noticed at the time.
Mm-hmm.
So that's interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah. Ultimately, Thomas/Kyle would give 4 statements to police. In the first 3, Kyle confessed to the rape and murder of the women, and in the 4th, another personality emerged.
All right.
A South African character, yes, complete with accent.
I'm sorry to laugh, but...
Yes, and I mean, they make note of the fact that this guy is putting on an accent, and they're like, it sounds pretty good.
So he's practiced, probably.
He's practiced this. Calling himself Philip Dax, D-A-X-X.
Okay.
Yes, and he told police also that Kyle was out to hurt Thomas.
So the immediate question here is whether or not he's legitimately has like fractured personalities, or if he's just making this all up.
Or if he's making it
as
all
an act.
up. Well, you can guess what the police and prosecutors think about this.
Yeah. They've probably seen it before, some variant.
Probably. So, and as you might imagine, when this case goes to trial, this forms the basis of his defense.
Okay. Kyle did it.
Uh-huh. Exactly. Well, it was more like he didn't do it, but if he did, he's not responsible because he's insane.
Okay.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
So, and actually bringing him to justice was kind of a long and drawn out process. I mean, it often is. But what happened is that he was first tried for the rapes and not of the dead women. The prosecutors convinced the women that Huskey had sexually assaulted those cases, which I mentioned earlier, were late 1991, early 1992. Mm-hmm. So the woman who contacted the police in February and the other women that they found. And so they convinced these women to come forward and press charges. And there were 2 separate trials in 1995 and 96, I think because... I think they separated them because in the first trial only involved one woman, and I don't know exactly. It may have been because she was the one who was not a sex worker. In this particular instance, this woman was walking down the street to get a breakfast sandwich at Crystal's, and this guy pulls over, drags her into the car, and drives off with her.
Wow, like no gun, just physically grabs her.
Yeah.
Stuffs her in the car.
I think she told the police that she never saw it, but she believed he had it.
Okay.
So yeah, and drags her off. Yeah, so there was her and then the other 3 women who were on another case in 96. And he was ultimately convicted on multiple charges of aggravated rape, aggravated robbery, especially aggravated kidnapping and aggravated kidnapping.
Okay.
And received a sentence of 66 years.
All right.
So, okay,
He still might get out. I mean, possibly.
Maybe. Yeah.
With that.
Yeah. So, he didn't go on trial for murder until February of 1999, which is easy for me to remember because it was my birthday. February 1, 1999 is when the trial started. And as you might imagine, the defense called witnesses to prove that Huskey had it's technically called dissociative identity disorder.
Okay.
But we all know it as multiple personality disorder.
Yeah.
And they said he's got this disorder. He shouldn't be held accountable for Kyle's crimes.
Right.
There were a couple of doctors who testified on his behalf. The first was Dr. Jeffrey Erickson, who had examined Huskey in 1977 after he broke into a house on zoo grounds to steal money. He was 16 at the time. And he said that Huskey was suffering from a brain disorder. I have yet to be able to find any greater detail than a brain disorder. So who knows? And then the more lengthy testimony came from psychologist Diana Mccoy, who she examined Huskey 27 times over the 3-year period after his arrest. And McCoy said that she met several personalities, including Kyle, Jericho, Timmy, and Larry. She said there were several factors contributed to his developing dissociative disorder. First was being raised at a zoo by parents who weren't emotionally supportive and made him feel like a caged animal himself.
Okay, that's a little bit fucked up.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I may be jumping the gun.
Okay.
But I mean, is there a precedent at this point for dissociative personality disorder for getting someone off? I mean, did the lawyer think this was a viable...
I didn't see that mentioned in any of the articles. I should probably have researched that. I don't know. But
if you legitimately have it,
yeah,
what does that weigh into the system? I'm curious.
Well, in Tennessee, at least at the time, I am not an attorney, and I don't know what the law is now. But in 1999, in Tennessee, there was no not guilty by reason of insanity.
Okay.
You could be guilty by reason of insanity, though, which would at least, I don't know what you would get from that, but you could avoid the death penalty at least.
Right.
So yeah,
he's in the wrong damn state for this kind of
defense. He's
defense.
kind of in the wrong state for this defense. He's not going to go free if they think he's guilty. He's not going free.
Yeah.
She also said that he had been physically and sexually abused by teachers and others, and this is the kind of the crazy story that makes you what? He claimed that he was recruited into a sadomasochistic prostitution ring as a teenager.
What? Is that a thing?
I don't know. That's what he said, though. So there's that.
I didn't get that flyer.
Yeah. So, that's the thing. That was part of the defense. And psychologists said that the personalities helped him to cope with his traumatic experiences.
Okay.
Which I think is something I've, heard about it before, is sort of people use those to compartmentalize things.
Okay.
And cope, yeah. They also put forth an alternate theory of the crime. So they weren't just going to rely on this defense. A woman named Linda Jarnigan testified that an inmate, Jesse James Coffey, who once worked with her husband, wrote her a letter confessing to killing one of the women, and said that in the same letter he confessed to participating in killing 2 other women and burying their bodies.
All right.
Her husband, on the other hand, testified for the prosecution, who, of course, denied raping and murdering anyone with his buddy Coffey, and basically said, "Yo, we snorted some coke together, but we didn't kill nobody." Basically, so that was pretty much that.
All right.
So the prosecution, of course, said, "Yeah, this is just complete bullshit." And in fact, this is kind of one of the best parts of this story to me. They suggested that he got the idea from popular media, specifically the novel and TV miniseries Sybil, starring Sissy Spacek. And actually he had, and this is sort of a little bit damning, he had told his psychologist that he read the book in 7th grade English class. And he denied reading it while in jail, but later admitted to the psychologist that he had it in his cell.
Almost like a reference book.
Almost like a reference book. So there's that.
Yeah.
And their other suggestion was that he got the different identities, the personalities for the identities, from a Days of Our Lives plotline.
Okay.
Yo, I've seen the show. I believe it. Yeah.
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 He's just evil.
They also called a former cellmate to testify, who said that Huskey had admitted to him that he killed the women and said that he wanted to rape and rob them and didn't want them talking to each other or the police. And that he told the cellmate he was going to fake a mental illness to avoid the death penalty.
Right. Yeah. Oh, that's it, man.
So...
I'm not convinced anymore. I think he's not... I mean, he's crazy.
Yeah.
He's psycho crazy, but he doesn't have a legit multiple personality.
The police who interviewed him 100% did not buy it at all.
Yeah.
They're like, they basically kind of were like, he put on a pretty good show here, but no. They did not believe it at all. So ultimately, the prosecution and the defense rest, and the jury goes to deliberate. They deliberated for 5 days. And as I said before, their options were guilty, not guilty, or guilty by reason of insanity, which would allow him to avoid the death penalty. But if he was convicted of first-degree murder, he would get death. And this was kind of crazy. Like, even the jury's deliberations were pretty contentious. I read an article from shortly after the case was over, in which two of the jurors were throwing shade at each other like harder than you've ever seen in the Knoxville News Sentinel. I mean, they hated each other, and it was like, wow.
That wasn't an issue.
It's a problem.
It seemed like maybe the prosecution didn't eliminate the right number of jurors.
Yeah.
Also.
So ultimately, the first trial ended in a hung jury, and they hung up on 2 factors. They all agreed he was guilty, but they couldn't agree on his mental state, like whether he was insane or not.
So where does that land him in terms of so it's actually the case has to be redone?
Yes.
Oh my gosh.
And the other factor was that one juror was uncertain if he was guilty of killing the 4th victim.
Okay.
So yeah, those were the 2 things.
Because they lumped them all together.
Yeah, and
right.
So the judge officially declared a mistrial on February 13th, 1999, after I think it was 5 days of deliberations. And after that, the case was drawn out for several years. There was a lot of wrangling back and forth. I think it was around 2002 that the evidence found at his parents' house was ruled inadmissible because the warrant was issued by a judicial commissioner and not a judge.
Okay, I don't know the difference, but...
I don't know the difference either, but the prosecution took it all the way to the Tennessee State Supreme Court, arguing that Tennessee is one of the few states that doesn't have a rule where basically if it's a technical error and the police were operating in good faith, meaning they believed it to be a valid warrant, that a judge can decide it's admissible.
Okay.
Tennessee doesn't have that rule, and ultimately in 2005, the Supreme Court upheld the ruling and basically just gutted their case, and Knox County had to eventually just dismiss the case. So as of 2005, the murder case is dead in the water.
Like gone, it's done.
It's done. Knoxville's first serial killer...
66 years, and that's it.
Yeah, Knoxville's first serial killer will never be held accountable for those crimes.
Wow.
However, he is still, in fact, currently incarcerated at South Central Correctional in Clifton. If he serves the full sentence, he wouldn't be released until 2056, by which, of course, he'd be long dead. And he became eligible, technically, he could maybe get a parole hearing in 2015, but so far, he's still there, and I haven't seen anything in the news about, about him having a parole hearing, because you know it's the kind of thing
There's no way. Parole. Right.
I doubt it. I think he's going to stay there.
So tell me, what's his age? So 66 years after conviction would be...
He was 16 in 77.
Okay.
So he was born in 61.
Yeah.
He'd be nearly 100 years old in 2056.
Okay, sweet. Well...
Yeah, so...
Unfortunate and very odd that it ended that way.
Yeah, it was a strange case.
No doubt. Awesome. Well, great job.
Thank you.
Cam. I have never heard of the zoo cereal, Mr. Zoo.
The Zoo Man.
The Zoo Man.
Yes.
That was cool.
So what are you going to tell us about?
Okay. I'm actually really excited about this one. I got lucky, I picked a good topic. And one thing that's cool about it is Cam has never heard of it.
I had never heard of it before, and
Yeah.
I purposely avoided information.
Well, except for one thing. So
Except one thing.
I'm going to cover the Brown Mountain Lights. All right? So the Brown Mountain Lights is a phenomenon that occurs in North Carolina to this day. So I'm going to break it down for you. And they're actually pretty famous. They're a legit tourist attraction. People drive to this spot to experience and witness the Brown Mountain Lights. And, this is one of those times where I'm like, this is why we do this podcast. Because the more I looked into it, the weirder it got.
Oh, fun.
I mean, or the more real, the more what is this? Because
You just went down that rabbit hole, didn't you?
I did. I went in deep. So one of the most amazing videos you can watch is National Geographic. A show was actually recording, and that's the only thing I've shown her.
Yeah, I have seen this video. And
I said,
it
this is
pretty weird.
All right, can you describe the lights? What do you? Can you just try your best to explain what they look like?
It's odd. It's sort of a glowing light. In the video, they're using a low light camera, but it's pretty. You don't, when you see it, you don't think, oh, it's kind of a weird thing because they're using a low light camera. It's just this glowing, almost vaporous light that kind of floats around low to the ground, and at a certain point, the light turns red. It's weird because it's not glowing much. It's kind of a dull red, and then it sort of winks out, and it comes back after a few seconds in a different spot.
And it moves.
Yeah. And it's the video camera, the camera they're holding is moving. It's not on a tripod. So you can see that it's not moving with the camera. It's moving in a different way than the cameraman is moving.
All right, so when you heard Cam describe these lights, this is a consistent description for over 100 years. Just people trying their best to explain this visual phenomenon. So I'm going to kind of break down some more adjectives so y'all can understand what I'm talking about. Like a toy fire balloon, a distant ball, a glowing ball of light, slightly yellow, lasting half a minute, a ball of incandescent gas in which a seething motion could be observed. A pale white light, as one would see through a glass globe with a halo around it. The lights begin as red, flare into white, and they appear as orange, blue, green, or yellow. They can last over 6 seconds to a minute, especially when they're floating. And some people have observed them actually split.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. The most famous photograph, there's a really compelling photograph by Charles Braswell Jr., who was actually a credentialed photographer for NASA, who captured he had two cameras running. One was a still, long exposure. He understood, the problem here is you're at night trying to film this thing.
Yeah.
And he also had a video camera running. So you can see both side by side.
I like that he's got backup there.
Yeah. You can actually see a long exposure, and I can really see it draw on the lens there. So,
and it's hard for for people to say that you're faking it when you've got two sources.
Yes, and it's...
Or at least harder.
His shot is compelling. And Charles was he was obsessed. He looked at this for 12 years. I mean, he would go back and back and back to this spot in the Pisgah National Forest.
Oh, so it's that close. Okay.
Yeah, it's only about 2 hours away, and I'll tell you all more specifically where it is. It's just outside of Morganton,
Okay.
North Carolina.
Yeah.
So the other guy who's kind of there's two other main experts. Joshua P. Warren, who is a self-proclaimed paranormal investigator, witnessed the Brown Mountain Lights when he was 12.
Okay.
And that changed his life, obviously. So now he actually does like talks, he does research, and obviously goes out and keeps watching and trying to take pictures of it. The other main expert is a physicist
Oh, interesting.
at Appalachian State. His name is Dan Canton, and he's the guy that has actually been the one who's ended up installing multiple, like 2 cameras that take time-lapse pictures, okay, to kind of scientifically try to continuously watch the Brown Mountain. So I'll get back to some of that, but I want to go back to the very beginning, like the earliest sighting, and then I'm going to break down like the theories, like what is this thing, okay? All right, so the first known written account was in 1771. A German engineer who was like basically the first white man to ever show up in this remote forest said, and this is some 18th century lingo, vapors which are borne by the wind, and when laden winds meet each other, the niter inflames, sulfurates, and deteriorates. So,
Vapors.
yeah. And there also was records that people were talking about it before the Civil War. There were late 19th centuries in the county, 19th century sightings. And then the first real journalistic report was in 1913. The Charlotte Observer wrote an article about this a fishing club was there, camping and fishing, and they reported the lights. And they described it as a toy fire balloon, a distinct ball with no atmosphere about it. Okay? So you already start to get this consistent description. So then in 1919, the Smithsonian Institution got involved.
Really?
Yes.
Wow.
They're like, let's get some real legit Weather Bureau scientists down here, right? And check it out. Like, what is going on? And their conclusion was that it was similar to a phenomenon known as the Andes light. The Andes light had been observed in South Africa, which was basically lightning on top of a mountain. But those mountains are way taller. Like Brown Mountain is a small ridge. It's not like this big mountain, okay?
Yeah.
All right, there was also an article with a pretty cool photo in the Asheville Citizen-Times in 1961. And these photos are on AppalachianArcana.com, by the way. So there's been hundreds of sightings, and they're all super consistent. So I want to just get the boring answers out of the way, okay? We'll go from there to the more interesting stuff. So there was a comprehensive report by the U.S. Department of Interior, a geologist, in 1971. Really skeptical guy, but by the way, his booklet is in beautiful Futura font. It's like the sweetest looking report I've ever seen. So
Awesome.
You would appreciate that.
I would.
So there's also Joe Nickel, who is the more of a modern version of him, who wrote for an online magazine called The Skeptical Inquirer. All right? So the two of them...
How skeptical is the Inquirer?
Well, the two
In
of
your
them
opinion.
are they just define skepticism.
Okay.
They're like, okay, this is a result of refraction of light, changing density in the atmosphere, and reflections from like distant lights or trains or cars.
Okay.
So they're not very imaginative actually, in my opinion. And especially
It kind of
after
sounds
you-
like they're reaching.
well, it feels like to me they're just going into it skeptical and they're coming out skeptical.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, and so one thing that's of note. So at one point, this Pisgah Forest was basically demolished by 2 back-to-back Category 4 hurricanes.
Wow.
All the power was out, no trains, the roads were impassable, and people were still reporting sightings.
Wow.
Okay?
Yeah. So no, it's not a reflection of lights from town.
Well, so the thing is that the physicist guy and the paranormal investigator are like, a lot of sightings aren't real. You know, there's just people who have overactive imaginations, and the actual Brown Mountain lights are very rare. And they're very distinct and different. So in the range of like 5 to 10% of sightings are actually real.
Okay.
So let's get into the theories.
Okay.
Let's start with a flying cryptid.
Okay.
A
Excellent.
will-o'-the-wisp.
Excellent.
Okay, so this is an ancient myth.
And a great magic card.
It is. It's an ancient myth. It's also global. There's stories in Mexico about this, and essentially these are spirits. They appear as lights, and the general idea is they lead you to doom. They're not good, but you follow them into the woods, and you end up something bad happening, right?
A cougar eats you.
Yeah.
Or bear.
And actually, in J.R.R. Tolkien's Lord of the Rings, will-o'-wisps are in the Dead Marshes or the Dread Marshes outside of Mordor.
Okay.
And so, in a kind of segue, one of the main theories is swamp gas. And this idea is that there's these like swamps that create lights, and the gas comes out and ignites somehow.
Yeah.
So specifically,
Is there a swamp around Brown Mountain?
not really. There's really not. So that's kind of. But
It's
I
the
think,
classic Men in Black
I
explanation.
think the will-o'-the-wisp in the swamp leading you to the quicksand or
Yeah,
whatever
yeah.
is kind of part of this. So to go back to the paranormal investigator dude, his conclusion, which by the way, he's president of the League of Energy Materialization and Unexplained Phenomena, LEMUR, which in 2004 published the report which said it's a form of plasma or ionized gas.
Okay.
Okay, so that's his kind of thought, is swamp gas or some kind of gas. Some people think it's radiation, like there's a radioactive material in the area,
area.
that glows at night, right? And if somehow it floats and glows. There's not an uncommon theory of ball lightning, like some form
Oh, okay.
of ball lightning that's happening there, which again, it's like, why there? And if it's ball lightning, which is rare, admittedly, you know, you'd think you could see some kind of measurable effect, maybe, by the meteorologist. Okay, so then we have to get into the alien theory, and also hallucinogenic glowing mushrooms, okay? Because in the X-Files, no shit, in 1999, an episode aired called Field Trip, which has Mulder like tripping on these glowing mushroom spores, and he finds these dead bodies that are glowing, and he attributes it to the Brown Mountain lights. So this has actually gotten into popular culture. So then there's Ralph Lale, who is the way kookiest theorist of all the different theories.
The kookiest of the kooks.
Oh man, this guy thinks that he is in telepathic communication with the lights, which led him to a cave. And in the cave, there are aliens from a planet called P-Worm that took him on space trips.
If there are mushrooms, I suspect they're in the cave.
I think he's tripping, literally. Okay, and he operated this crazy like museum for a while
Interesting.
called the Outer Space Rock Shop, Anyway, he also had a mummy in his exhibit. So they could be aliens, or an underground base is one really whacked out theory. There's a metaphysical angle of this, which is that the light foretell something that's about to happen. Like they're prophetic.
Okay.
Like they start to appear before something significant.
Okay.
And others believe they are conscious beings of some kind that they can actually communicate. And one witness said that they lost time.
Okay.
Okay? Now they may have had a few beers. All right, so let's talk about ghosts. Definitely quite a few different variations on the ghost theory. One story is that there was a couple in 1850. A cheating husband killed her and killed the wife.
Okay.
And the dead woman's body disappeared, and the local people began looking for her. And then lights appeared, and the searchers believed the lights were part of the woman's spirit returning to haunt her husband.
Oh.
Kind of like busting him, like I'm still here.
Okay. Okay.
Okay. So the dead wife. Another legend was a story of a young mother-to-be who was. It's a little different version, but kind of similar. She was murdered, and the lights materialized to help people find the body. Okay, so it's kind of a different version of the Will-o'-the-Wisp. Mm-hmm. Instead of trying to lead you to something bad, it leads you to the actual solution of the crime.
Well, that's interesting because I think one of the stories that I have heard about hauntings at East Hill Cemetery involve sort of low glowing lights.
Oh, cool.
I think, yeah.
Okay.
So,
neat.
Kind of similar.
Then there's this pretty creepy one about slave ghosts. So Brown Mountain was actually named after a plantation owner. And he was kind to his slaves.
Sure.
Okay? Right.
Sure.
And then, but one night, he went to the mountain and he didn't return. And one of his slaves took a lantern to go look for him, but he was never seen again. And there's a story about this lantern being the lights of his ghost. That's the way it manifested.
Okay.
Was as a lantern. That's a bit out there.
Yeah.
All right, so then there's the Moonshine Stills. Okay? The theory is that there are various underground moonshine stills up in this valley.
Still hidden there.
Still brewing. And they need coals.
Uh-huh.
And the idea is you open them up
Uh-huh.
and hot air foops out.
Yeah.
And they're lit up from below.
Okay.
All right.
Okay. I can see it.
Yeah. One of the great things about this podcast, is just discovering other people who are into Arcana.
Right.
It's fun. You just learn about other people. And in one case, I actually found a really great podcast I want to give a shout out to, and that's the Carolina Haints podcast. And they did a podcast on the Brown Mountain Lights.
Oh, fun.
There wasn't a whole lot of new information in it. It's by Dan Sellers and Jeffrey Cochran. However, the Carolina Haints podcast took a camping trip.
Did they go look for the lights?
Yes, they did.
Did they find them?
Oh, yes, they did. So,
Awesome.
they went out there, and lo and behold, both of them saw the same thing.
Okay.
And in their testimony, they saw small balls swirling inside a large ball.
Cool.
Yeah. So, I thought that was really cool. The idea that you get so interested that you actually go out and check it out, and sure enough, you actually run across them. So this is where we get to my theory.
Your theory. So what you've reviewed?
I have a theory.
You've reviewed the evidence. What do you think?
Yes. Okay. So, that's part of the fun of this is you can imagine it be whatever you want, or you can pick your favorite version. But I actually have decided to jump into the game.
Okay. Go.
Okay. So the Appalachian Mountains were formed 500 million years ago. This was before Pangea, which you've all heard about in your 9th grade
Earth
science class, right? However, there are some rocks that are 1.1 billion years old.
In our region?
Yes.
Okay.
And there's actually a map of where geologists have found these especially ancient rocks.
Okay.
And I put that on the website, so you actually see where these splotches of ancient rocks are. And there's also a fault line, a pretty significant fault line called the Brevard Fault Zone that runs straight
Under Brown Mountain.
through Pisgah.
Okay.
Okay? My theory is that there is some really ancient, primitive, like chemicals or oxides or things, and the ground is still moving. Mm-hmm. And there's just an occasional like leak.
Like a little puff of air.
A puff of air, and the
gas,
thing is,
rather.
because it's this special spot, it's only going to happen around here. It's this really ancient, weird.
And the Andes, apparently.
Well, no, that's lightning discharge. That's more like magnetic and ions.
Okay.
I'm thinking this is more about you have a geological event, like a very, very, very slow eruption.
Okay.
In fact,
And it's like what, sulfur? Sulfurous
something,
gas?
maybe it's piezoelectric.
Okay.
The substance can be ignited by water
Or air.
or air. So one thing that was notable was there's a beautiful rock called Green Mountain. No, Glass Mountain. Anyway, it is actually a solidified molten core of a volcano. So it's like a volcano that never quite erupted, and it solidified and then later rose up.
Weird.
So you can see some of these around the Smoky Mountains are these really weird, like ball-like things. They're actually ancient volcanoes that solidified before erupting.
Oh, wow.
Yeah,
Cool.
so it's kind of molten rock. So that's my theory, and I actually just want to ask: is there anybody here who has ever seen Brown Mountain Lights, or has any new information to add? No?
Can't be lucky every time.
All right, so just to give you all the info, the lights can be seen from the Blue Ridge Parkway at Wiseman's View, milepost 310 and 301, and from the Brown Mountain Overlook on NC Highway 181. Now, Wiseman's View is clearly the best, but let me tell you, it is hard to get there. It's like a 45-degree incline, crappy road. However, it's utterly beautiful. It's worth going just regardless. It's a fantastic just journey to go see this amazing national forest. And the Brown Mountain Lights do have a Facebook page, so check them out if you're interested. There's even a meetup this Friday at Wiseman's View.
Fun.
I found that on Twitter. Yeah, so it's a very ongoing, active mystery, and so I hope you enjoy the story of the Brown Mountain Lights.
Good job.
There we go. And that's Appalachian Arcana episode 3.
Episode 3 is in the bag. Thanks everybody for coming out, and thank you so much again, Michael,
Thanks,
Elderbrew,
Michael.
for having us.
All right, y'all. See y'all next month.
See you next month.